Great. Welcome, everyone. Today is our session here kicking off right now, all about zero trust and securing critical infrastructure. My name is Sasha Farbach. I'm the cybersecurity evangelist here at Fudo Security. And on this session here today with me is my colleague, Rafael Biosna, pre-sales engineer of Fudo Security as well.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Rafael. So let's get straight to it. Our agenda today, as I said, we'll probably be taking about 25, 30 minutes of your time. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll get started with the topic here right away. We're going to be covering today is looking at the current threats that are facing critical infrastructure, what that looks like, looking a little bit more about steps that could be taken to reduce and mitigate that sort of risk. Then we're going to cover zero trust and how zero trust strategy what works into the wider security paradigm here, and that's connected to critical infrastructure. And then at the end, we're also going to be taking a look at a use case from the industry and how that's applied with privileged misuse and how Fudo plays into that. And that's what my colleague will show off here for you today. So without further ado, let's jump right into the topic here. Briefly about us, Fudo Security. Major vendor of PAM, look around the world, actually, in terms of lots of SMBs and large-scale enterprises that do use us. You might recognize some of the companies here, and that's across the spectrum: banking, healthcare, government, transport, education. So countless companies trust us taking care of their security. But it's all about the current threat that is all things with security of national and critical infrastructure. So just to jump right into that, we have a serious problem that most people are aware of. I'm sure that in recent months, there's been a lot of you that have been following the news. It started very much for many of us in the industry some time ago as many attacks occur, but really things changed with Colonial Pipeline, where the average citizen also became very, very much aware of things that are happening, and the greater scheme and the wider industry was able to see what the limitations, the vulnerabilities, the weaknesses are of SCADA systems, of PLCs, really of looking at also what could be much worse in future. Thankfully, with Colonial Pipeline, let's say the effect was limited. But we also have to define what is critical infrastructure. And that in itself is already a task. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But it's really important to see that it has now come to the attention of the administration, the Biden administration, the US government has done a lot actually in recent months to really take really strong action to help out in this particular front. Time will tell if that's enough, but it certainly is a good start. Unfortunately, some bad statistics right off the bat. I mean, this year alone, we already had 56% of energy utility facilities that reported at least one cyber attack, which resulted in caused data loss, which means that, of course, operations are shut down. We've seen a lot of world-changing events in this last year that have really forced and pushed organizations to adapt and rely also heavily on a lot of remote access to ensure continuity. So that adds to this whole problem here. There's been a lot done, though, to offset the dangers. There's been a recent memorandum also by the administration, which outlines a lot of steps that safeguard the United States critical infrastructure. So this goes and follows a lot of what's happened as around, I think it was around May of this year when the executive order came out, which also led to other kinds of certifications. We had that CMMC, the Certified Maturity Model certification that came out. So a lot of warnings about ransomware, about cyber threats. But really, I think the needle has changed. And there's a quote here that was actually in the Financial Times, which was, if we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be a consequence of a cyber breach. So that's actually something, come to from the president's, eyes themselves. We've seen that, and we certainly have everything at play where something like this could happen. I mean, God forbid this could. Now, there's one side of this where I'd like to say that there is government, and there's government and their actions and pushing regulations, pushing framework, which is excellent to see in this area. But we still have to see that there is also an issue with the private sector, because if we look at how critical infrastructure actually is set up, we see that the majority, I think around 80% of US IT infrastructure still resides in the private sector. So even though there's a will from the government to push this, the IT and the private sector have to come and play along. So, and I don't have to say that, regulation, of course, is always very popular. Of course, it really is. But historically, regulations and such, they will meet, and they have met with resistance. And with this, it probably will be no different. I mean, there's a lot of, let's say, positive federal action that has taken place recently, and also looking at sort of industrial control system, cybersecurity initiatives that call for, these very grand schemes of forming a path for government and industry to take action together. And we also, of course, seen the immense effects and the immense impacts and results of major breaches. Like we look back at SolarWinds, Kaseya. So the stakes have really risen to incredible heights. And with cybersecurity, with infosecurity, of course, ringing the alarm bells is one thing, but we also have to provide solutions. What I said with the scope and the definition of what that actually means. So what is meant with critical infrastructure? And actually, there are certain sectors that have been outlined by CISA 16. As a matter of fact, I'll just quickly kind of go through some of them. So they include things like chemical, communications, critical manufacturing, dams, defense industry, emergency services, energy, food and agriculture, government facilities, healthcare, IT, nuclear power. So obviously a massive list. So we have to kind of also be aware that if we segment and call all of these things critical, where do we find, let's say, which ones are more important than others? I think in the United States, we have a much broader view of that. In other parts of the world, such as if we look at in comparison to Europe, to the European Union, their definition and scope of critical infrastructure is much more narrow and actually encompasses only 7 sectors. So that's also an interesting comparison to make. Also, with all these critical sectors, they're very much reliant on computerized OT, so operating technology, in order to function, which very much is connected and converging very much with IT and exposing critical industrial control systems, so ICS endpoints and other assets, really to see like aggressive threats, like we've seen with ransomware, case in point, Colonial Pipeline. So we add to that this whole issue of IoT, which is another huge area, problem and challenge for everyone. We add to that remote access and everything I mentioned before of how we've really had this massive shift over where a lot of endpoints are remote, people are connecting from all over the place. So this whole thing is just widen the attack surface for IT and OT systems. And without really being too dramatic, if we have an attack on such a critical infrastructure, let's say a dam or a water treatment plant, I mean, this could really disable, destroy, damage production lines, processes. We could have cities that are left in complete darkness. We could have, life-saving technology and emergency services offline. So this is no longer the purview of science fiction. These are things that are happening. Unfortunately, I would go as far as to say that it is no longer a question of if that will happen, but when that will happen. So this intersection, this OT and IT security effort here, these are unfortunately not aligned. There are various things that have been conducted, surveys that are conducted, which point to basically that we have this problem. We add to that, the legacy systems. We add to that problems with certain things that are not up to date. We add to that the shortage of trained staff. We add to that on various levels the inability of people to connect the right way, the lack of training. So there are many areas which need to be taken care of, and we can't really work fast enough to prevent things like we've seen with ransomware attacks, with phishing, denial of service attacks, etc. In essence, I'd say that we see the world is very much blind, and President Biden had something to say about this as well. It's another quote by him. Basically, we cannot address threats we cannot see, right? So we have to look and deploy systems and technologies which can monitor control systems, which can detect malicious activity, which can facilitate response actions to cyber threats. So that's the most essential thing to ensure that we have safe operations on these critical systems. And again, most critical infrastructure companies operating with these legacy security structures and measures are in this blind position. And so therefore, you cannot defend against something and threats that you cannot see and that you can't notice, but you must do all that you can. So basically, the next problem is then, if an insider or some kind of attack does occur, misuse does occur, it can be weeks, months, years potentially after something is noticed, after the initial intrusion takes place. So obviously with SCADA and ICS systems in energy and utilities, manufacturing, if something goes wrong there, then that could jeopardize lives. It takes time, money, and effort to investigate these incidents and to return them to operation. Right? It's one thing to actually see there's something wrong. It's another it's another to see where that's happened. So the forensics element. But in many cases, we forget. We get caught up with the headlines, and then that cost of all the backlog, restarting everything from scratch. Now, these are things that take an immense amount of time and cost to add to that. So that's the nature of it. And on here as well, you've already seen some of these statistics here, but it's never, unfortunately, it's never a good situation. So in all of that, what can we do? Where is the saving grace, if you will? Zero trust for us in the industry, it's not something new. You've probably heard this many times. It can be simply summed up in never trust, always verify. And there are many components to this, which I think are really key. And just to kind of give you a little bit of just a primer, a little backdrop, right? So with zero trust, it's in simplest terms, no implicit trust just because you're within the firewall, right? So the perimeter is no longer sufficient. And that's dealing with anyone who has access to anything. The previous arrangement has been overly permissive. You're on the network, you must be trusted. Well, that's wrong. You essentially are going down to a road of giving you access only to what you really need. So again, buzzword going back several years, but it's now taken on a completely new dimension, as it's been mentioned in the executive order from Biden, which I mentioned earlier. So very much this whole zero trust paradigm dictates that no connectivity is allowed until a user is authenticated, that their endpoint is validated, and application access is verified for that individual or that process, which mitigates and stops criminals from gaining access. There's never such a thing as 100% security. We know that. But it sure is a massive way forward. And there's so many loopholes and areas which we need to address that I very much believe that any kind of strategy, and we see now companies, we see small organizations, medium-sized organizations, government institutions adopting a zero trust paradigm. And of course, it is not a simple click of a button. It is not something that just can be purchased. It's not a product that you can buy. There's still, I have many conversations with clients and prospects that they want to buy zero trust. Where do I get it? But that's not the point, right? And it's also one thing to open up that discussion, to implement that has to be across the network, across all layering of staff and across the enterprise or organization. So this takes time. And of course, criminals are not wasting any time in really pushing us to the brink here. I will go through some of those actionable points of zero trust strategy and also what's been recommended by CISA in a moment here. But with zero trust as well, I mean, an interesting thing is that by Gartner, just thinking one thing, Gartner has predicted that by 2022, that around 80% of new digital business applications that are open up to ecosystem partners are going to be accessed through zero trust network access. We're going to see a high stake going into, I think in the next few years, 60% of enterprises are going to phase out their remote access virtual private networks in favor of zero trust network access. So this change is upon us, and the change is upon us, and it is required very much in the United States on a federal level. And I do believe that we're going to see more implementation of that into various sectors across the board in the months and the next year to come. And also, just to kind of recap here on some of these points, I mean, it's not just one box ticking thing. We also have to, put into that the essence is here securing privileged access accounts. That's one thing that can result as of all this. We also have to be aware of compliance. Compliance in every way. It enforces us, and it is in every way through the European regulations, through GDPR. In the United States, we have, of course, HIPAA with healthcare. In California, we see now very much what's happening with the CCPA. In Virginia, we have that new law as well. So we will have more, and I said earlier, there will be more regulation. I think at a recent conference in Black Hat, we had a representative of the US government say very much that there is some kind of board in the works, something like the National Transit Authority Board, to actually investigate cyber attacks and to really open the books on what happened and hold those to account. So as I said, there's one thing that government is doing and saying, and then there's what the private sector with the government will be doing. But of course, we will see and feel more of these things in our lives. And I think that critical infrastructure, as I said, with those 16 areas, that will be very much felt, if it's not already felt, will continue to push everywhere. And of course, that's also going to be global as well. So in terms of looking at what the actionable advice is here as well, as I said, CISA and the FBI have given guidance for us a little bit. I want to just take a moment to look at some of the things that they've actually said. So one of the first points here for least privilege. So this whole idea is we're looking to very much see where and identify where like the compromise can come from, right? So we're looking at ICS and SCADA systems with this. We're also looking at securing and monitoring remote access to OT and IT networks is also really, really important and vital because both of these internal and external users, they need access to ICS networks. So this is where access more and more involves remote connectivity sessions. And these can be very often unsecured and unmonitored, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. So this is where CISA and the FBI really recommends that we limit access to resources over networks, in particular by restricting RDP. So after looking and assessing all these risks, basically if RDP is considered and deemed operationally necessary, then you restrict the originating sources and require multi-factor authentication. And then moving also more into whitelisting. So if we're looking at implementing application whitelisting, some may know it as allow listing. This can help mitigate the risk of malware-based attacks, basically by only allowing certain systems to run programs which are known and permitted by security policy. So we're looking to therefore implement software restriction policies and other controls to prevent programs from executing from common ransomware locations like temporary folders, etc. So, I mean, essentially it goes into unusual user activity and unauthorized credential use to access ICS could also indicate signs of an attack, right? So, I mean, it's one thing if there's a pattern, right? If we see a pattern that replicates itself, that can be flagged, logged, and blocked. So it's one thing if someone is basically doing their work or logging in from somewhere in Texas at their usual laptop to begin work, and that's fine. But it's a very different story if we're looking at someone logging in at midnight from another country using a desktop PC, right? So this is something where this all plays in. There's a lot more guidance and there's several more points. I'm not going to now unleash upon you all the details of all of this. I want to also allow for a bit of a use case here and what that looks like. We cannot unfortunately mention the client here, but it is in the energy sector, and I'm going to have my colleague Rafael now go into that. So I'm passing over the mic to you.
Okay, give me a few seconds. Okay, thank you, Sasha. So let's take a look at how you can use just-in-time access to control and manage your contractors or your users' server connections. What are we going to do here is to log into the user access gateway, a website that Fudo PAM provides to both users and administrators' benefits. Instead of learning any new IPs and procedures, you can just send a web link to go to when the network access is set up using VPN secure gateway. All user has to do is to connect to this web page, which Fudo PAM provides, and there are all the servers and pages to which you want to record sessions with Fudo PAM. As you can see, we're using the usual Active Directory credentials, but instead of checking and just the static password, the user is asked for a second factor. And this is the ever-changing code that is required to get into user access gateway. Fudo has several methods of augmenting authentication with an extra factor. And this time we are using Google Authenticator method, also known as OATH, which in Fudo is trivial to add to any Active Directory-based user authentication scheme. With this simple change, you bolster security for accessing your servers. Plain old static passwords won't be enough to connect, thus password sharing or theft could be greatly reduced. Okay, we are logged in, and as you can see, the user can connect to multiple systems using RDP, SSH, or web connection. Let's go to the one we want to connect to. This is a SCADA system managing your production infrastructure. More and more industry-grade production equipment comes with a web interface to manage it from. And Fudo PAM can help you to record all activity in a graphical form to track your administrators or contractors' actions, archive the sessions, and make it searchable. But the connection we are after is not allowed yet. The gray background tells the user that the SCADA system is available upon request. And this is what we have to do now. Let's request access to the system. Fudo is flexible when it comes to ways of requesting access. The user might choose immediate access for 2 hours, which is the default behavior, but also can schedule an access window ahead of time, which is very useful when it comes to planning maintenance work over the weekend or at night. This way, you provide just-in-time access when the contractor actually needs one. Okay, let's switch now to Fudo GUI Console. In the left section, we already have one access request ready to be granted or rejected. So let's grant this request. With this functionality, you can set up the whole workflow of granting access to core systems. In this example, it's just one person that has to respond to users' request. But if it was a special part of your infrastructure, a core business critical service or server, you would be able to configure 2 or 3 people to agree upon access request. This is easily done in Fudo PAM just by setting the minimum vote number for a whole set of servers or services. There's also a veto option here, and with this, you can create flexible and secure workflows for granting just-in-time access to the business-critical resources of your organization. Now back to user's view. The access should be granted now. So let's refresh the row with the SCADA system and see if it becomes available for us now. Yes, it is. So let's click the connection button. Notice that there are 2 ways for the user to connect. This is also Fudo's advantage. For different users, there might be a different gateway to this SCADA system. For example, if the user is connecting through the company's VPN, the user can choose to connect both ways, but others might get a chance to connect to the system directly via internet over a secure connection to user access gateway. Of course, if your company's security policy permits this, Fudo is flexible in many ways, and defining entry points is surely one of them. Notice that the link we are using has the word OTP in it. It means that the link is one use only. You cannot reuse it, so there is no link sharing allowed by design. This is there to keep everything secure and accountable. And with the help of the AAPM module, which Fudo has built in, you can actually generate those one-time links on the fly using a simple Python module. AAPM stands for Application to Application Password Manager. And with this aid, you can build the session monitoring into your third-party software, for example, a CM system or your internet site. Okay, the session is started now, and it works just like any other sessions that the user might run in their browser. But the best part is that what you're seeing here is not a web page. It's actually a stream of a browser running inside Fudo. And that's because one of Fudo's objectives is to provide complete separation between the user and the infrastructure. You could have Trojans chasing viruses, infecting ransomware running on your computer, and yet infrastructure is still secured by Fudo. That's because all you get are the visuals. There is no direct connection between the user and the site, which the user is seeing here. The technology is similar to the streaming games like Google Stadia, and Fudo Security has been developing this technique for 3 years now. Basically, it's as secure as you can get with zero trust environment where the contractors or administrators are maintaining or changing your core business infrastructure thanks to the power of Fudo Security's web recording feature. Okay, let's switch back to Fudo GUI to see the session in real time. I will try to make both sessions visible. I will try to rearrange the windows side by side so you can see how it works and how convenient it is to view the user session live. Okay, so let's make this window smaller to accommodate for my screen size. And as you can see, Fudo records the web session as a graphical session. So you can actually see what the user is doing in the session, what is going on the user's screen, and what are the changes that user makes to your systems. This session can be searched through later, just like any other graphical session in Fudo. So you can, for example, search for the device name and have all the sessions listed in which the user changed something on this device. Okay, so granting access is one thing and revoking access is another thing. Revoking access is also critical for this zero trust workflow. So you can easily do this within the archive request section of the Fudo GUI here. So as you can see, there are previous sessions that were granted, and let's revoke the current access. The important thing here is that revoking session does not stop the session. It just revokes access to this particular user and the system. Terminating the session is a different process. So revoking is one thing, and terminating the session, this is done via the session list, and you can easily stop the session while it's active. Okay, now the SCADA system access has been revoked. As you can see, the user cannot access it anymore. The user has to go through the granting workflow again. It requires sending the access every time when the grant has expired or was revoked by the user. But of course, the user can still access other systems, and do their business as usual on parts of your company's infrastructure that do not require special access workflow, like the important SCADA system that we were showing you. So part of your system can be available to the user upon request, and other parts like monitoring systems, less important servers like mail, for example, can be accessed from Fudo without the need of requesting the access, and you can make it available for every user anytime. So this is not as important as your business critical systems. Okay, that's it for me. Sasha, back to you.
Great. So what I want to finish with that is say thank you very much for all of the attendance. Thank you so much for your feedback. I hope you enjoyed this session of our Fudo webinar and everything about critical infrastructure. I'm also very delighted this has awakened interest in Fudo. So please, at this point in time, I'm really gonna be happy to, if you have any other things, just get in touch with us directly. We can arrange more demos or more an in-depth discussion on how something like Fudo PAM can help your organization. So also many thanks to my co-host here, Rafał Wiosna. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all of you joining us from around the world, and have a wonderful day.
Bye.